Our speaker today is Jim Roche. He's an executive professor of higher education and faculty fellow at the Center for Innovation in Learning and Design at the School of Education, College of William & Mary. Before moving to a full-time faculty position at the School of Education, he served for 15 years as the director of academic computing at William & Mary. He taught as a clinical faculty member in the Curriculum and Educational Technology program. As director of university e-learning initiatives, he played a key role in launching the online MBA program at the Mason School of Business. He currently teaches courses in data-driven decision-making, action research, educational planning, adult education, and emerging technology. His research interests focus on understanding advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, deep learning, and the Internet of Things, and how those technologies will impact the workplace and educational institutions in the next generation. I give you Professor Roche.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I've been thinking about artificial intelligence for a long time. My first introduction to an AI program came probably 20 years ago when I was still at Hamilton College, and I had installed a little program on my computer that was called Aladdin. And Aladdin was an artificial intelligence engine that sat in the back of your Macintosh, and it watched everything that you did, and it made suggestions about how you could be more efficient. So I'm sitting there one day. I have a very important presentation. I've got my computer out. I've got three members of the Board of Trustees and my dean, and I'm showing them about why it is that it's very important for them to put more money into computers for the Career Center at Hamilton. And all of a sudden, this little genie pops out of the bottle, and it said, "Master, I noticed that every day about this time you play Tetris. Would you like me to start your game?" This was the first known instance of the Anthony Weiner defense, because I immediately blamed it on the students who worked in the office in the evening and said, "They must have hacked my account." For those of you who have seen presentations of mine in the past, and hopefully there aren't many of you, you're looking at this and you're thinking this must be a typo, because Gene Roach has never produced 2 paragraphs in his life that didn't have a typo in it, and I'm sure not about to start now. But it really isn't a typo. What I want to talk to us today a little bit about is how do we think about artificial intelligence. The field is so big. There are so many things happening with it every single day that it's impossible for us to take any piece of that and go through what the pros and cons and impacts are. But what I really hope to do today is to inspire you to think about artificial intelligence in a way that is more sophisticated, more thoughtful, more deliberate than most people are in the society today. So for me, the thinking about how we think is a crucial part of what it means to be educated. My focus, one of the focuses that I have developed over the 35 years that I've been in higher ed, is trying to understand metacognition. How do we know the science of how people learn? How do you learn? If you have to learn something, how do you go about doing it? And those things might be as different as learning linear algebra as a freshman at Virginia Tech versus how do I learn how to protect myself from some horrible disease that's about breaking out across the globe, and all the things in between. So we start with the science of that. It's called metacognition. We next move to a set of skills. What are the skills that you can help students develop so that they can regulate their own learning, so that they're not requiring a teacher all the time to be standing over there and say, "Well, you made a mistake here." How do you get students to be able to regulate their own learning and to become better at learning? And then finally, how do you produce a generation of adults for whom lifelong self-directed learning is a key value to them? And that they're able to look at an issue, which is as complicated as the role of artificial intelligence, look at that as something as complicated as that, and find a way that you can learn enough about it that you can make good decisions about the future. So that progression has been kind of heart and soul of what we want to, what I've tried to accomplish. That's what I want to try to do with you today, is to get you to think a little bit about how you think about these things. Now, most adults don't get up and think about artificial intelligence. That's for, other than me, I spend an hour every morning reading feeds on artificial intelligence and looking at all the new things that's going on, but that's my job, and I still enjoy doing it. But most people don't. But I think that there are probably some people in the audience who actually do every day interact with artificial intelligence in some way. Anybody here who remembers the flash crash of 2010 when the stock market lost $1 trillion worth of value in 36 minutes? And that was as a result of rogue trading by algorithms who were triggered by a human trader, but once that had started, the algorithms just kept trading until the stock market had dropped $1 trillion in 36 minutes. Now, sometimes, now that I'm approaching retirement, I worry about that. I said, what happens if somebody triggers that and all of a sudden this carefully accumulated IRA that I have all of a sudden begins to disappear? That's artificial intelligence, and I tell you, it's much more scary now if we think about how quickly that could happen. Any of you ever get a phone call from or a text message from your bank saying, hey, we think that somebody is using your credit card improperly. Are you in Mexico trying to charge gas? That's artificial intelligence. Anybody ever think about, I wonder if there are going to be enough workers in the future to fund my Social Security? When I hear about the fact that all of these people who now are paying payroll taxes are going to be replaced by robots who don't pay Social Security tax. Where is that going to come from? Anybody had their identity stolen? Been experienced ransomware? Hopefully not. Any of that. So all of those are things that I think you think about, and all of those are things that are driven by artificial intelligence. So I have, when we're thinking about the future of AI, I have five things that, what my students call provocations. These are things that I think I believe at this moment, but if we have a good, lively question and answer, I might change my mind on them. And then one thing that I think is always really important when we talk about this, which is making sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So I'm going to quickly start with shared definitions. I want us to appreciate the importance of wicked problems, understand that predictions are hard, and what we're trying to do when we set policies, we're trying to make predictions. What would happen if we were to do these things? Those things are hard, particularly about the future. Understand what it's like to play on the second half of the computational chessboard. Then I want to talk a little bit about, I want to try to convince you that policy matters and it's really hard to make decisions. And then finally, I want you to consider embracing the idea that humble is the new smart. Okay. So let's start with some definitions. I want to start with just make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So I'll start with the definition of artificial intelligence. How many of you have heard of the Turing test? The Turing test is a long time thing that in the early days of artificial intelligence, it was defined as creating machines who can do all of the things that an intelligent human can do. That was the way we defined it. So we defined the artificial intelligence in terms of what humans could do. And then some people developed what they called the Turing test. And the Turing test was determined whether, could I put a computer in one room, a person in the other, they could have a conversation, and the person wouldn't know whether they were talking to a computer or a person. And that was called the Turing test. And for many years, that was the test of artificial intelligence. Did you have a computer that could do that? But since about 2005, no computer scientist in there who's actually practicing would ever use that as the model. So now the definition is not what a human would do. Take the human out of the equation and say that the definition of artificial intelligence is an independent agent. It could be a computer, it could be a person, it could be whatever, cell phone. An independent agent that is capable of interacting with its environment and responding to it. So take out the human part. We don't define it in terms of intelligence anymore. We define it in terms of whether or not that agent is capable of responding to the outside world. There are three kinds of artificial intelligence: general intelligence, super artificial intelligence, and narrow AI. General intelligence is what they used to be trying to do in old AI. You get a computer that's as flexible and thoughtful as a human being. It can do all the things that a human being can do. I could send this robot driven by artificial intelligence into the kitchen and it would figure out how to make a peanut butter sandwich, or it would figure out how to make a cup of coffee, because those are things that are really easy for a human being to do. It seems like that may be impossible for us to ever achieve, although there's a whole group of people, largely based in California, who think that by 2040 we're going to have an artificial intelligence that is equal in intelligence to what a human being is. And they're calling that the singularity. That's the period. That's the time when the machine becomes as intelligent as a human being, and that's artificial general intelligence. Super artificial intelligence is what happens next year after the general intelligence. Because if we make a computer that's as smart as a human being, the first thing it's going to do is to make itself smarter. And so that the next year you're going to have a computer that's much smarter than a human being. After that does that 5 years, then that's the part that lots of people are worried about, that computer is going to become so smart that the first thing it's going to do is figure out, I don't need people. I can do everything that I need to do as a computer without people, and so it will wipe out the people. Now, I will say that the chances of that happening are much less than either a thermonuclear war or environmental collapse. And so I am much more positive about the future than Colonel Larry Wilkerson is. So I will go on record and say I'm not a particularly optimistic person about the future, but I'm much more optimistic than he was last week. Okay, but narrow AI is where the action is. Narrow AI is the kind of thing where you use an intelligent agent to be able to do something that's important in that responds to its society, and we don't care about whether it's the same kind of person, what a person would do. It's the kind of thing like, can this artificial intelligence predict the next book that you would like to read on Amazon? Can this artificial intelligence, can it lay a perfect row of bricks without making any mistakes and without involving any human beings in it? Can an artificial intelligence diagnose cancer better than an oncologist? Those are narrow. They can only do one thing. The machine that can lay bricks cannot diagnose thoracic cancer. So it's narrow. It does one thing. This is the environment where all the action is. Every day when you pick up the news and you read something that artificial intelligence is going to do, make better potato chips, serve better coffee at Starbucks, and every morning is it's the narrow application of artificial intelligence. So when I talk about AI, the ones that are on this, I don't worry too much about those. The next area is lots of different kinds of artificial intelligence. Early on, what we tried to do is we tried to program computers. You'd take a really smart doctor and you would program the computer with all the rules of things that the doctor knew, and then you would say to the computer, diagnose this, because you know everything the doctor does. What we found out very, very quickly is the doctor knows lots of stuff that you can't program into the computer. So what they did was you develop new kinds of artificial intelligence called deep learning. What deep learning does is it quickly goes through and you just give the machine a whole bunch of tests, and the machine says, oh, I can learn from this. It looks at the ones that had cancer, it looks at the ones that didn't have cancer, and it tells you, oh, here are the things that I've learned about what it looks like when you give me a cancer scan. The machine learns. We don't tell it ahead of time. It learns on its own. And then there are two kinds of deep learning. One is supervised, where we say, here's 1,000 pictures of cats, here's 1,000 pictures of dogs. We ask the computer to be able to then differentiate between a cat and a dog. We do that. We give it its training steps. The next one is unsupervised. You give it 1 million pictures and you say, look at these pictures and tell us which ones are the same and which ones are different. And it sorts it out. It not only gives you a picture of a dog, it gives you 500 different breeds of dogs that it can then identify on its own. So when we're looking at this artificial intelligence as a individual, as an intelligent agent, we're only concerned with narrow AI. We're primarily concerned with deep learning, and we're primarily concerned with unsupervised learning. So just quickly, when we talk about AI, we're talking about an AI system. So we're not just talking about what happens in the computer. Computer scientists primarily talk about what happens inside the computer. As human beings who are interested in using this, we're really interested in three parts. Input, what happens in the computer, and then what comes out of it. So just give you quickly. So most of you have on your email a spam filter. A spam filter is an artificial intelligence engine. What happens is every email message that you have goes into this into this engine. It goes through and it reviews it, and then based on your reading habits, it says this is spam and this isn't, and it puts it either in your junk folder or your spam folder or in your inbox. And most of us now, we don't even look at that anymore because the spam filter is so good that it's almost always right. But that's a thing that most of us use every day in terms of artificial intelligence. Audio, speech recognition. Take an audio file, put it into a system, chunks it up, gives you a transcript. Transcripts now, you can get this thing done for free online. They're about 90 to 93% accurate. They'll probably become more. Inputs audio, file, chunk. Output is a transcript. Translation file, put English into it, chunk. Chinese comes out. Google Translate, 40 different languages on each side. The translation quality of these now is about the level of a native speaker of the language. It is not the equivalent of a professor of modern languages at William & Mary. As I am required by law to tell you that is not, that probably is not even as good as a modern language major at William & Mary. All right. Your browsing history. When you're using Amazon or you're looking for a movie on Netflix, every click you make is being recorded by that company. So it knows how long you stayed on a page, what you clicked, what you didn't click, and then what it does is it chunk comes out with a recommendation, and so you get a page that says here's some things that we think you might be interested in. And that recommendation page is the output sent to your computer after that algorithm is run. It's really hard to squeeze accurate information out of American corporations, but someone that I believe told me that Amazon gradually gets 34% of their income from recommendations. That it's so good that we click on it and we wind up buying stuff because the recommendation knows so much about your habits and your buying habits that it's really good at telling you things that you might want to buy next. LiDAR, the little devices that sit on the top of self-driving cars in California, getting all kinds of information about where you are in maps, chunk, sends it out and tells you, oh, there's a traffic jam upstart, sends a message and tells you to reduce the speed. Artificial intelligence driving the automobile for you. And then finally, CT scans, put a whole bunch of scans in, goes through, chunk. Says these three look like there's a cancer that you should pay attention to. These other 100 probably you don't have to pay much attention to. Okay. So those are the three parts of an artificial intelligence system. Now the output of that increasingly, like a 3D printer, is an output system. So you can say, I'd like to be able to print this stent to go in my heart, and here's the plan. Plan is the input. Artificial intelligence sends it to the printer. It prints out the little piece that you need to put in your heart. Can't do that yet, but you can do it in a lab. You can't do it in a hospital yet. Input, processing, output. So the first thing that, when we look at artificial intelligence problems, one of the things that I want you to first do is to understand the concept of a wicked problem. A wicked problem is one that is so complicated and so intertwined that it's very, very hard for human beings to get their head around how to solve that problem. So a typical problem might be, how do I improve a wicked problem? How do I improve student test scores in Petersburg, Virginia? So in a school of education, well, we do that by we have a certain way that we think we worked on that, but then when you go and you actually look at that problem, you find out that it's incredibly complicated. It has to do with nutrition. It has to do with the home environment. It has to do with whether or not the kid is living in a car or whether or not they're living in an apartment. If they're living in an apartment, is it ravaged by rats and bugs, or is it a nice clean? what you find is that problem really is very, very complicated. It has to do with all kinds of human issues. So for us to take one little thing, so I'd like to improve reading test scores in Petersburg, is a wicked problem because it really requires that you solve all of those problems. So, and wicked problems are rampant in things like artificial intelligence. Easy problem. Should the federal government regulate Facebook? Simple problem, right? Yes, they should. They should close them down. Well, yeah. You really close down a company that billions of people across the country, across the world, count on to keep in touch with their families and friends and to be able to build their businesses? Do you really just shut them down? Well, and as soon as you start to pull on that, you realize that that's a simple question. It's one of the questions that I think they asked in the reading in the book. Should the federal government shut down Facebook or however they? Well, it seems like it's really simple, but it's not. It's complicated. So one of the things that we've done as a society, I think, is that we've gotten ourselves into the situation where we define problems in terms of talking points, tweets, bumper stickers, slogans, and if we can't solve a problem in 140 characters, we don't tackle it. We say, well, we'll let somebody else worry about it. We'll kick it down the road. What I'm saying is it's time to stop. If we really want to get artificial intelligence to work for people, as opposed to corporations and governments, we need to be able to get people who are willing to tackle wicked problems. At William & Mary, we built wicked problems into the heart of the online MBA program. Students, when they come into the MBA program, identify a wicked problem, something in almost all these folks are working, something in their business or personal life that they want to try to focus their MBA program on fixing. And we start off with them before that we'll accept that, and before we accept it, say, how wicked is your problem? Because if it's a simple problem, we don't want you spending your time on it. We want you to spend time working on the hard ones. And we want you to apply what you learn in accounting, and apply what you learn in organizational behavior, apply what you learn in finance, and apply those to trying to solve this problem that's important enough that you identified it. So one of the things we need to do as a society, if we want to make this stuff work, is we've got to be willing to tackle the tough ones, not the easy ones. Second thing we need to understand, prediction is really hard particularly if we're trying to predict the future. And what we're trying to do when you set policy about the future of computing and the future of artificial intelligence, we're trying to make a prediction about what's going to happen some years down the line. My graduate study group at William & Mary, we start with the question each time that we do it, is take a student who's entering school this year, starting high school, going to go through 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, going to graduate into the workplace. Our question is, what is that person's work life going to be like, and how is it going to be different as a result of artificial intelligence, robotics, deep learning, and those? That's our question. We have no idea when we go into it, because what we're trying to do is predict. And the thing is, nobody really knows exactly what that's going to do. What we're trying to do is to make an educated guess about that. The problem with prediction, and this is our real problem with humanity, I like this, is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Now, I love higher ed as much as anybody else. I spent 35 years of my life working in higher ed. I love just about everything about it. But there's one thing that strikes me as very, very strange. This is the organizations that we're counting on to prepare our students for the future. And every year in August, we have a convocation where a bunch of very smart people dress up in robes and put on funny hats, as though we were living in the middle of England in the 12th century. And then we go out and sit in the sun outside the Wren building in Virginia. Does that give you confidence? And part of it is because our brain loves that. We like the pomp and the circumstance and the connection to the past, and we like it more at William & Mary than almost any place else. Okay. One of the problems with thinking about AI is that it is both complex and complicated. So it's complex in terms of there are lots of moving parts, and each moving part is very hard to understand. So this is the slide that usually I show people, and this is where I lose the audience. So stick with me just a minute. Yes. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence at its very base level, we're talking about computation done by computers to be able to make a prediction for the most part. And each one of these is an input. That's something that's going into the computer. Then there's a layer where the computer is doing hundreds and thousands and millions of computations, much of the mathematics of which has only been invented in the last 10 years. Last time I studied math, don't use me as an example, much of this is new, even to somebody who studied mathematics carefully, because we had to develop new ways to do it. So the output of a particular piece of artificial intelligence, whether it's a recommendation or whatever that is required, is the result of hundreds and thousands of individual calculations, complicated linear algebras, probabilities, statistics, all kinds of things. And almost none of us in this room are going to have to worry about really understanding that. But what we really do have to do is we really have to make sure that we trust the people who actually do understand that. And that the decisions that they're making are decisions that help us move forward in the world of that we're looking to impact. Okay. Right. Okay. That if that doesn't fluster you, what will? Okay. All right. So I do think it's important, though. You don't need to understand the linear algebra behind this, but I do think it's important to understand that all of the things that we're talking about getting better in artificial intelligence are based on more computer capacity. And that computer capacity requires four things to be able to work. It requires you need to have processing power, and we've all heard about that, Moore's law. The computer gets more powerful every 18 months. Our computers now are so powerful that they spend 95% of the time to 98% just sitting there waiting for us to do something. So they don't need to get a whole lot more powerful. The ability to store information, store your photos, your movies, or whatever. The speed with which you can connect to the network, and algorithms. Those are the four pieces that have to work together to be able to produce really high-level artificial intelligence. And what happens is they never flow together all at the same time. They're chunky, they're bursty. So at one point we may get lots of good storage information, but the algorithms can't keep up. In another case, we might have really good algorithms, but the compute can't keep up. So when we're looking to the future, anytime somebody tries to predict, what we're doing is we're predicting what's going to happen at a point when all four of those things come together. So right now we're thinking about, lots of people thinking about 5G. Well, 5G is a network speed capacity that should allow us to do all kinds of things with computing that we can't do otherwise. So when you're thinking about this and somebody says to you something like, the computers are going to become X% more powerful in the next years, what they're talking about is this overall capacity. Okay. Over the last years, the cost of these things have fallen almost to zero. It costs almost nothing now to add an extra gigabyte of storage to your computer, to be able to get extra speed to the network, or to be able to build computing power. So what that leads us now in a place where, as we're trying to think about computing, we're at a point where all of a sudden the doubling of computer power for the last 50 years is about to make a difference. So when we need to think about what could happen over the next generation, we need to think differently than about the last generation. So here's an example. You've got a lily pad that's a half a square foot. You've got a lake that's 6 billion square feet, square inches, and then what you say, the person goes down to the end of his dock, you stand there's a lily pad. The next day he goes down, there's 2 lily pads. The next day he goes down, there's 4 lily pads. And the next day he goes down, there's 8 lily pads. The next day 16. I said, this is interesting. And after about 24 days, the whole 1% of the lake is covered by lily pads. So he goes down to town and says to the mayor, we got a problem. We got lily pad infestation. The mayor says, well, let's do something about it next week. Well, the next day there's 2, and the next day there's 4, and then there's 8, 16, 32, 64, and by the time that they have the meeting, the entire lake is covered by lily pads. You've hit the knee of the curve. You hit that place at the bottom where the knee goes up. That's where we are in computing today. For 50 years, computing power capability has doubled every year, but it hasn't seemed to us as though anything is happening because what we were doubling was so small. Now we're at the point when you double it, it matters. Another way of describing this is the second half of the chessboard. We need to play on the second half of the chessboard. This is an analogy that was used by Emperor wanted an inventor to invent a game for him. He invented chess. He said, "Wow, this is a wonderful game. I want to reward you. What shall I give you?" He said, "I'm a simple man. Give me a grain of rice on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, 8 on the next." By the time he gets to the 33rd square, it's all the rice that's ever been produced, and the emperor takes him out and chops off his head. All right. Okay. Now I want to put you to work a little bit. I want to ask you to try to think about how you would make a decision, given the fact that we know that we have wicked problems, that prediction is hard, and that we're looking at having to play on the second half of the chessboard. I want to ask you to try to make a decision about the future of some AI. So imagine that we're in a beautiful auditorium, and you are the members of the House of Delegates of a small New England state. Now, this makes a difference. It could be if it's New Hampshire, and it's live free and die, it would be different than if it were Vermont and your senator is a Democratic Socialist. So you pick. You pick. So in this, I'm going to give you a short briefing on an artificial intelligence policy, and then I'm going to ask you to vote on which bill you might be able to be in favor of to accomplish this. So here's the okay. So here's I don't know how that happened. Anyway, so you've got 2 towns 80 miles away. Each town has a huge problem with accidents from drunk driving. There are dozens of people involved in accidents every year. You have damn, those graduate students, you just can't count on them for anything, can you? All right. So here's the situation. You've got the 2 towns. Each town has a couple of bars. You have a artificial intelligence lab at a university. They come to you and they say, "We want to help you solve your drunk driving, your accident problem." So what we're going to do is we're going to give you access to an artificial intelligence engine that will be able to help you decide who coming out of a bar might be impaired, and then be able to help them make a good decision about what they want to do next. So in each bar, 2 towns 80 miles away, they put the same array. There's an array of cameras going into the bar, and an array of cameras in the parking lot. In the cameras going into the bar, they take video of people walking into the bar, and then they save that video and send it up to the massive computer array that is in this lab to be able to analyze it. Then what they do is they take video of the person walking out of the bar, and they send that video up, and it compares the two. It compares it based on 1,000 different variables, and some of them are very applicable to determine whether or not somebody is impaired. So it looks at things like your gait, how loud your voice is. It can get your complexion. It can determine whether or not you're ruddier than you were when you walked in. All this stuff, and it can do this in a matter of seconds. Okay? 2 towns, both getting the same information. They've tested this on 8,000 people, and they found that their algorithm for determining whether or not somebody is either impaired or not impaired is 92% accurate. Of the 8%, about 3% is somebody that they have said is impaired who isn't, and the 5% of people who they said who is not impaired but is. And the way that they did this is they used this algorithm. When people walked out of the bar, they said, "We'll give you $20 and a free breathalyzer if you'll blow into this tube." And then they use that to say as the impairment. So they say, okay, now 92% of our predictions are correct. And they roll this out and they want to test it. Town number 1 says, oh, this is something that can really help us. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the alcoholic beverage control people train our bartenders so that if a person walks out and the AI determines that that person is impaired, we're going to have the bartender go out, meet them in the parking lot, and say to them, "Hey, it looks like you may have had too much to drink. Would you like us to? We'll get you a free Uber, and then we'll send one to pick you up so you can pick up your car in the morning. How's that sound to you? Does that sound okay?" And then that's their intervention. So these people are specially trained to be able to do that. Town 2, they say, we don't like the idea of doing that because we think that confronting a drunk in the parking lot is too dangerous for somebody with a couple of days of training from the alcohol beverage control. We think that it really should be a trained police officer. So instead of sending the notification to the bartender to go out and intervene, they send it to the police department. The camera array takes a snap of the person's license plate, and then the police department's able to track it through the fact that every light pole has a camera on it that's designed to be able to control the traffic lights. Okay, so those are the two situations that are there. Okay, so what do you think the chances are this comes back on when I push the button? Oh. Okay, so here's the results of the study. In town A, there were accidents, 28 accidents before the project, 8 after, -20. In town B, went directly to law enforcement, 26 before, 4 after, -22. Those are not statistically significant. DUI related arrests are quite different. So in town A, you had 25 before the project. That dropped down to 10 after the project because the intervention worked. People were in town B. It worked just as well because they arrested 38 people instead of 22 because it was really good at identifying who was inebriated, and you could be much more efficient in catching it. Now, who wins and who loses? So anytime that you're dealing with a wicked problem, there are winners and there are losers. So in town A, the families were the winners. So those families who did not have a family member arrested for DWI won average of about $13,500 a piece that they didn't have to pay for fines, fees, attorney fees, and other kinds of costs. So that was the families won. The town lost $52,000 in fines and fees, which meant that they had to lay off one of their part-time police officers because they counted on those fines. The lawyers lost $75,000 because they didn't have as many clients. One of them moved out of town, and other family costs were also lost by different people. In town B, the families lost an extra $250,000. The town made $56,000 more, and they were able to hire another officer between 10 and 2 with that extra money. The lawyers got an extra $80,000, and one of them hired a new associate, and other family costs spread around were $75,000. Okay, so that's your briefing. Now some of you say, well, I got a lot of questions. I want to know more about that. That's not the way we do it in our. Yeah, the fact that you haven't read the bill doesn't make any difference at all. That's we're not that kind of legislature. So what I want you to do is we want you to vote now, and you have 3 options. Bill number 1 allows the use of artificial intelligence and visual recognition, but it restricts the use of those images only to law enforcement. So that's based on what happened in town B. Bill 2 allows the use of artificial recognition by other state agencies like the ABC to be able to enhance public safety. There's a third bill that was produced by a public interest organization that says we shouldn't be messing with this at all. We should take a 2-year moratorium and not use this at all. And then the fourth option you have is to vote present. So if you say, I don't have enough, you can just vote, I'm present. Now, if you do that, it means that whatever your colleagues vote for, you're stuck with for the next couple of years. That's 3 years, okay? All right. So, same technology, 3 different bills. How many of you think that you would be, and this is not going to go on the public record, so you're not stuck with this forever. How many of you would be inclined to vote for bill number 1? Okay. And how many of you would be inclined to vote for bill number 2? And how many of you would be inclined to vote for bill number 3? And how many of you would just vote present and say, I don't vote for bills that I haven't read? Okay. So you can see how, same technology. About half and half voting for 1 and 2. About an even split. So how do you reconcile this? This is what makes it a wicked problem. You have winners and losers on different sides. You have different beliefs about the role of law enforcement. You have different views about the way that law enforcement interacts with people. And that's the kind of, when you look at policies, should we ban Facebook? Should we ban G5 equipment that is made in China? Should we compete head-to-head with China for supremacy in artificial intelligence, or should we cooperate with China in some way? Should we invest in only commercial use of artificial intelligence, or is there a role for the government in direct investment in making artificial intelligence available to serve all people? Those are policy decisions. They're not technology decisions. But the technology is really important. If you say, well, artificial intelligence could never do that, well, it can. It already can do it. There's absolutely no doubt. Just with the technology that's off the shelf today, we could reconstruct that scenario, which is just a scenario. It's not anything that anybody's really doing that I know of. But I know that the technology exists. The ability to take a piece of video and analyze it for 1,200 attributes is easy. You can do that in an instant. So as you're looking forward to this, the question that you have to ask yourself is, why did I vote the way that I did? Why did I vote for A and somebody else vote for B? Is there something about the way that I approach and think about this particular problem that is going to guide the way that I approach and think about other problems? Humble is the new smart. I'm gonna flick through the 5 characteristics of humble as the new smart. But one of the things that I think we have to come away from this with is the understanding that, in my belief, this is my belief. I don't speak for the college and I don't speak for anybody else. But I think that over the next decade, the computers that we have access to for artificial intelligence are going to become 1,000 times more powerful than the ones we have today. That's the arithmetic of the fact that if the power continues to double each year for the next decade, they will be 1,000 times more powerful than they are now. There's nothing that my graduate students or I have seen that suggests that doubling is not going to continue. There's no physical limitation that I can see that's going to cut across all those things. Algorithms, processing power, network speeds, and storage. Those things are going to continue to get more powerful per dollar, and as they double, then what that means is that anytime you say, well, a computer could never do X, stop yourself. Because it's very, very possible that if there's a commercial value to that the computer will be able to do it. So I'll give you just a couple of quick examples in closing. Say a computer could never write a novel. Well, right now a computer doesn't write a very good novel, but if you feed the computer to train it enough good novels, if it's 1,000 times more powerful than it is now, the chances are very, very good that it will write a novel that most people other than tenured professors of English will never be able to tell was written by a computer. Most of us will sit there, we'll read it in the airport, and we'll say, oh, this is pretty good. We're already seeing it in short pieces. So the Washington Post last year, artificial intelligence wrote about 850 articles with no human intervention in it. If you read Forbes or Fortune and you look at the reports that are in there about the financial reports, almost all of those are written by artificial intelligence. Almost all of those, because they're so cut and dried that it's really easy to do it. I think in 5 years you could easily write a doctoral dissertation in education in a week using artificial intelligence. You wonder how that goes over at School of Ed, right? Yeah. So here's the challenge that I see. This is a scary. I said I kind of scare you a little bit. The scary part is if that artificial intelligence can do all those things that we used to just think humans could, what will the humans do? So the way that they're talking about this, we talk about this in my course, is the hollowing of the American, or the hollowing of the economy. What happens is that there are lots and lots of jobs, very high-paying jobs for people who are expert in cybersecurity, data science, tax lawyers who know how to get around the system, those kinds of things. There are lots of jobs. Companies cannot begin to fill the jobs on the high end. On the low end, there are lots of jobs for people who are nurses' aides or CNAs in healthcare facilities. There are lots of those jobs, but those jobs don't pay enough in the current environment for anybody to actually live a life on. And in the middle, you had a whole bunch of jobs that in previous generations were middle-class jobs that required you to have some education and training, and they gave you a middle-class lifestyle. Those jobs are being replaced by computers. So if you go back to this, this is the job growth between 2003 and 2013, the percent change, what we saw. Jobs on the high end over that period increased by 16%. Jobs on the low end increased by 16%. Jobs in the middle decreased by 2%. And my thesis on this is that it's only going to get worse as journalists, underwriters, bricklayers, machinists, auditors, paralegals, all of these positions that have been good, solid middle-class jobs are going to be replaced by computers, and you're going to have de-skilling. Many of the people that you're going to take the hard and interesting parts, the computer's going to do that. You're going to take the human part and you're going to give that to low-skilled workers, and we're going to have some really serious issues, some really wicked problems that we're going to have to deal with. I put computer programmers in red as my final point, because one of the things that we're seeing now is that everybody is talking about, well, do a boot camp and learn how to be a coder. Should every student in high school learn how to code? Should everybody learn how to code? In my mind, the first job that's going to be eliminated over the next decade is writing computer code. Artificial intelligence can write much better computer code than 90% of the humans. True on that. Now, we're much less likely to be destroyed by that. But if we don't find ways as a policy to deal with that kind of disruption, we're going to whip ahead. And it's going to take people who think differently about problems, who understand the importance of really understanding the way computers are changing, and to be able to work intelligently, to be able to work good. So, thank you very much. All right. Question over there, yes.
Yes, there's an old computer term, garbage in, garbage out.
Correct.
On one of your slides, you've got 5 different inputs. One of those inputs could be highly accurate. Another input could be very, very uncertain. How do you deal with uncertainty on the information you're providing?
Yeah. So there are 2 things. One is we're not doing it very well now. So the bias of algorithms is one of those things that computer scientists really need to deal with. Because when you put garbage in, if you don't correct for it, then you get garbage out. The other is that most of these algorithms, if you can put them into a situation where they're getting test results, they'll improve themselves. So if you, in the example of getting impaired people off the road, the more times that you actually test people and they say, yeah, this person predicted that they were impaired and they were, the better the algorithm will get. So those are issues that are they're very important. Algorithmic bias is something that computer scientists are really trying to work on. Yep.
Are you able to predict where the next war will start?
No, but Larry probably has an AI that can. Yeah, no, I don't. I think I'm more worried about. I think there's going to be a war for people who, in the United States, people who can't find a decent job, who have spent their whole life doing all the right things, and their jobs have gone away, taken over by automation and computing. They can't figure out what to do with it. It will be a different kind of war, but I think it's one we have to pay attention to.
You probably don't want to hear this, but what do you think the role of the teacher in the classroom will be?
Yeah, I think there are two parts of education that we have to look at. One is the cognitive part, and the other is the relationship part. I think the cognitive part is something that these artificial intelligence engines can really help us with. So if there's a student who's trying to learn how to do a particular mathematical sequence, the computer is going to be able to tell us with some good certainty why it is that person is struggling, because they're going to look at millions of other students who are struggling with the same thing. They're saying, here's the prediction as to why it is that person, here's 3 or 4 ways that you might be able to fix it. I don't think that for the next decade that we're going to be able to get the relationship connection of a teacher who really cares about a student. There's a whole area of computing called emotive computing that I think is one that really requires us to think about, because what it means is that what we're looking at is computers who can simulate emotional attachment. So we have, in one of my classes, we had a little bunny that was being used in hospitals. And the little bunny was given to to kids who were sick in the hospital, and it used artificial intelligence and advanced robotics to be able to respond to the way that the child was feeling. And so if the child was sad, it would plop its ears down, its eyes got big, it would say, how are you feeling today? It would converse with the student. And those kids who had that bunny healed faster than the kids who didn't have the bunny, because the bunny was simulating a person who cared about their feelings, and it was there all the time. So I think that for the near term, that a teacher who cares about students, really cares about them, responds to individual students and those kinds of things is going to continue to be the most important part of a school. I think what we have to do is figure out how do we use this other part so that we free up teachers to do as much of that as we can. Long term, I think all bets are off. So I think that's just it's a prediction. I actually hope it's wrong. Yeah. Brian? Oh, I'm sorry, over there.
Ultimately, aren't all jobs vulnerable?
The part of me says yes. I would think that anything that a commercial organization can figure out a way to pay for, if the computer can do it cheaper, faster, and more reliably, it's vulnerable. That's my sense. And I think we're seeing even things that we said, there's no way a computer could do that. 1,000 times more powerful, yeah. It could. Yep.
Would you comment?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here.
Sure.
I guess I'm on.
Okay.
Gene, you dismissed, or you didn't talk about super AI, and I must admit that's one of the things that's worried me. Is there a possibility to do some kind of breakthrough in connection with all this that would lead to that? Are we totally unprepared for how to deal with that?
Yeah, so I think that's where the philosophers and the computer scientists have to talk to each other, because I think that one of the assumptions about super AI is that the computer will develop a consciousness and it will see itself as a separate entity from humans. If that were to happen, and that's the danger, is if a computer is, let's say that we get a general AI and it's really successful, after 8 iterations, it's going to be 1,000 times more powerful than the person who invented it. And in that case, it's very likely to say, oh, I don't need these people. With new robotics and nanotechnology and things that we don't know that are going to happen, this computer is actually going to, it's got 3D printers connected to it all over the world. It can print just about anything that it might need. So it can instantiate itself. It can connect itself to the real world in a way that if it decides to do that, and it's 1,000 times more powerful than the people who correct it, it could be a really a big problem for us. The more likely scenario is that some human being will set it off on a course that will end humanity. That's the more serious one. Yep. Okay. Yes.
Would you comment on the time that computers have taken over, say, an airplane flight, when computers get in car, and then with disastrous results, when computers have taken over but done the wrong thing?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that autonomous vehicles for me is one of those that's really important for us to take a look at. We have a kind of repulsion about the fact that a computer might take over something that might have an accident. So right now, if we had fully autonomous vehicles at the way that lots of pundits are predicting, we could save 35,000 lives in the United States alone if the computers actually drove the car rationally in a way that is possible using the technology. So most of those 35,000 fatalities are caused by operator error. And so if you could cut that down, then you would have actually having the computer take over the car would be a good thing. Now, we are repulsed by that. So there was the example of a self-driving car in Arizona that ran over a pedestrian, killed the pedestrian. And instantly, throughout Arizona, throughout the country, they said, no more self-driving cars. Well, that week, 8 pedestrians or bikers were killed by cars with human drivers. And the next week, 8 more, and the next week, 8 more, and the next week, 8 more. But we're not as repulsed by that because there's something within our nature that says we don't want computers taking over airplanes. We don't want computers driving our cars, and we certainly don't want computers killing our pedestrians. So I think one of the things that you have to figure out is how high a standard do you hold these devices to. Computers fly our airplanes all the time, and they fly them very well. But every once in a while, they don't do a very good job of it, and it's those every once in a while that we have to worry about. Yep.
This is a basic question. It does not involve any sort of ethics.
Oh, God.
But there seems to be a coffee maker war competition.
Yes.
And is it appropriate to view how a coffee maker works with artificial intelligence, or is it other stuff not related to AI?
I think this is actually a very, very important question, because almost every piece of AI is being embedded in something that is primarily designed to make money for somebody. So Starbucks just announced that they're putting artificial intelligence into 4,000 of their stores built into the coffee maker. And the coffee maker then, it determines, because there's fluctuation within a coffee maker, it determines what's the exact characteristics of this coffee maker that produces the best, most profitable cup of coffee. So if people say, yeah, I'm going to buy more of these because the AI really is better, then the companies profit by that, and they're going to put more and more AI in it. And if you believe that AI is making it, you're going to buy that coffee maker because it's got AI. Frito-Lay now is using AI to be able to develop the micro-market potato chips. If you believe that their potato chips are better because they use AI, you'll buy them. And this is for virtually, if you look at it, it's refrigerators, it's microfiche, it's everything that you can think of that has that built into it. So I think it actually is a huge ethical issue as to whether or not is that where we want to be as a country, allowing places like Amazon and Apple and Facebook and Microsoft to develop this AI solely for the purpose of selling you more stuff? Or is there a role for AI in terms of making life better for human beings in a broader sense? And that's as ethical a question as I think you can ask. Yes.
You said that one of the things that will control, to some extent, is the policies that are generated or created, or how do we, or what do we look for in policy makers that would give us any indication of where they might be going?
I knew somebody was going to. I think at the very start, you should have policymakers, particularly in the legislature, who realize how limited their knowledge of this really is, and don't think, well, oh, I must be knowledgeable about everything because the people of my state elected me. And I think that's the most dangerous part of that. So I think the first thing we need policymakers who are humble enough to say, this is something that I, with my 3 staff members and a 10-minute briefing, cannot understand well enough to make decisions. And what that means is that you need to have people in the government who are scientists and engineers who you trust to be able to help you make good decisions. And you need to make sure that those scientists and engineers have to engage with ethicists and spiritual people and other people, so that when we make a policy, it's based on really understanding the science, but it's also based on putting that science in the frame of the human experience. I'm right at this particular minute, I'm not particularly optimistic that that's going to happen. But I hope it would. Right now, I think that there's a movement across the country to not pay attention to science and expertise that is going to hurt us in the long run in ways that we can't begin to understand yet.
This is more personal, but you have had over 30 years of higher academic experience, and the cost of college tuition today is god-awful with so much debt for this next generation. If you had a few grandchildren.
I do.
Okay. What advice would you give them as far as a major goes? Because most of our children are going to be in that middle class gap over the next 30 years or so.
Yeah, I would tell them not to, again, this is my personal opinion. I don't speak for the college or anybody else in this, but I would say don't worry so much about major. What you need to do over the course of your PK through 20 is get yourself comfortable with ambiguity, get yourself comfortable with regulating your own learning, get yourself comfortable with setting learning goals and accomplishing those goals, and make sure that when you come out of your undergraduate education, that you're positioned to be able for the next 15 or 20 years to learn on your own the things that you need to. For me, if I look at it right now at this particular time, that means understanding ethics and good reasoning and understanding enough mathematics that you can understand what this revolution is about. I'll tell you, at age 70, it's really hard for me to learn linear algebra. If I was going to really learn linear algebra well enough to understand this, I should have done it when I was younger and my fluid intelligence was at its peak as opposed to my crystallized intelligence now. That's another way of saying I've lost a couple of steps. So I think that what I would say, don't worry. So major in something that is going to help you hone those intellectual skills. The other thing that I think is really important, wherever you go to college, find faculty members who care about you as a person and are going to help you to develop in the way that's unique to you. The curriculum, one of the things I think we know about higher ed is that the curriculum for most students is not the thing that sets their trajectory. What sets them is the relationships that they have within that experience. And so suck every bit of it. Go to office hours. Take advantage of internships. Do independent study. All those things I think are that's the core. And suck every bit of that you can, and then worry about the major later on. The major is less important, I think. Personal opinion, not speaking for anybody other than myself.
Going back to the graph where you had the menial jobs very high, the middle class jobs very low,
yep,
and the intellectual jobs for the future very high. Here's the problem, and one question was, when's the next war? My concern is the foundation of society, as far as America is concerned, is the middle class. and the middle class is going to get hurt. That's going to create a revolution. That's going to create a situation where, I'm not saying that we're going to become communists, but socialism is going to take effect. You're going to have to take care of all those people. And that's a big concern. And I think that's where AI is going to hit us in the rear.
Yeah. So I think that when we look at I think that you make a number of really good, important points. I think the first thing is that civil unrest across the world is likely, that's high up on the list behind nuclear, climate change and nuclear war. Civil unrest where societies break down is something that we have to be concerned about. I think one of the things that's really important in this next generation is that we have to get beyond the labels. And we have to, and I think that the way we think is in labels. We're saying, oh, socialism, it's communism, it's conservative, it's liberal. The fact is that if you have tens of millions of people in the country who cannot find any work through no fault of their own, then what do you do about that? And the fact is, right now, as a society, we have no idea. So we don't have the political courage, it doesn't look like, to even raise that issue and start to experiment with ways because the labels are so important to us. So if I say, I think one of the things we should be experimenting with is a universal basic income. That we tax the robots, tax the production. We use that money to provide a basic income. We do incentives for people to work because work is more than just money. Our work is central to our identity as people in the United States, at least. So I think I think you're absolutely right. That's a source of incredible power. But we have to get to the point where we say we're not going to be bound by these labels anymore. We're not going to say universal basic income. That means that people are going to get something for nothing, and I'm against that. We have to say, what are we going to do if these people cannot, through any fault of their own, find meaningful work? And is there something that they could be doing that would make the society a better place for all of us to live? I think, yeah. Okay.
Can you comment on the collaborative role of AI in medical diagnosis, treatment, just within the realm of medicine?
Yeah, so I think that this is one that's changing really rapidly. I had a conversation with a person who sells MRI machines. What she said is that she hasn't sold a new physical machine in 5 years because all she sells is the software. The MRI machine is perfectly capable of doing all the scans that they need to do. So where she said is that in the practice, the people who read those scans can now do 3 or 4 times more of the scans than they could before because the transmission is so fast, the monitors are so sharp, and the computer scans out 80% of them and says, there's nothing here to see. These are the 20% that you really need to be able to pay attention to. And of these 20%, these last 5 are ones that you need to look at. So for me, that's collaboration. Now that requires a very skilled oncologist because many people can look at that scan. They can't see it. The computer has actually seen things about that scan that the average oncologist wouldn't see. So that collaboration is you have to be able to say, here's what I saw. Look at that and say, wow, that's something. It's a new part of this image, and then people begin to pay more attention to that. So I see the collaboration as going back and forth. There's a new movement to have AIs either collaborate or to be able to fight with each other to be able to produce better results. So you have collaborative AI where 2 AIs approach a situation differently and then share their information. And then the other way of doing it is you have an AI produces a piece of music, and another AI says, that's not music. And they go back and they forth and they fight with each other. And the products of those are often better than would be produced by either AI alone. Yes.
I've read and heard some examples of how AI can make mistakes.
Yes.
Based on our human misunderstanding of what what, for example, medical images may have in common that the AI system detects, but that was not what we were looking for.
Right.
And I wonder if you have an example of that.
Yeah, so I think that so this is one of those really scary parts where AIs make mistakes. So, one of the most dangerous parts about using artificial intelligence is like in the criminal justice system. So right now, AIs are used in some places to determine what the appropriate sentence should be for a person. I don't know that any of that is purely that the AI just hits on the gavel and passes it down, but many of these sentencing guidelines are actually developed by artificial intelligence engines. And then they're being used. I don't know any place where it's actually being used in practice, but it's certainly being developed in that. Much of that is highly biased. So that when you feed it, when you're training the AI, you feed it lots of examples of, here are a whole bunch of people that were recidivists. So you feed it all, and then it's saying, okay, the AI is going to determine what's the chances that this person is going to reoffend, and if it's a person who's highly rated, they're going to get a different kind of sentence of probation or whatever they know. Well, all of that data is highly suspect. It's highly racist. It's highly it's not reliable. The states that collect it don't do a very good job. So if you put all that stuff in, you're going to get an AI that's much more dangerous than allowing judges to make the decisions about it. And there are lots of those examples where we're trying to use AI. The Netherlands just passed a law that is really interesting. So we're not using this for criminal justice, and it just is in any way in the Netherlands it's not appropriate. So.
There are a number of us in here that tutor at elementary schools, kindergarten and first graders in particular. And a contrast that we see, a number of us see, is between those kids that are the same age. And they're not getting the attention at home that prepares them for the learning experience. How do we bridge that gap for the future? Because some of them are destined to be in that group that doesn't have a job today and no prospects in the future.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, I think for me, the first thing that we have to do is to realize that education in the United States is as wicked a problem as it exists, and that for us to keep thinking that we've got it solved because we have a new version of this SOLs or whatever is a fool's errand. So I think that if the students that you're tutoring find that the problem with them catching up is that their home life is a disaster, then somehow you have to find a way to help make their home life more predictable and more organized so that they can take advantage of your tutoring. And if you find out that you go and you find out that part of that home life is that they don't have anything to eat 3 days a week, then you've got to figure out how do we make sure that they get something to eat. And if you find out that the reason they don't get anything to eat is because one of their parents is in prison and there's no income, then you have to figure out what to do. So for me, it's that wicked problem part. The good news is that the work you're doing as tutors, where you help that child think that somebody really cares about them, can undo a lot of the bad things. And so you need to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. It's persistent. It's a thorny issue.
Okay, so another wicked problem is the criminal justice system. I was wondering how AI could be used to improve it, maybe on the organizational side. The backlog we have of looking at causes. But is there anything where AI can apply?
Yeah, so AI in the legal system is really a very interesting one. Depends on what the backlog is about, but traditionally, the backlog has been in criminal discovery. That you have all of these documents and all of this material that needs to be processed by the lawyers before they can build the case, so that they can go to court, and that could take months and months to do it. Artificial intelligence engines are really good at doing that now. So they're getting better all the time. So you have work that was being done by paralegals and young lawyers just out of law school could easily be given to artificial intelligence engines that then would come back and it could do months and months of that legal discovery overnight. That should be able to then translate into faster turnarounds and more equitable court cases if we could eliminate the delay. The delay seems to me to be one part that AI could do. And all of that technology is in place. It's being used all the time. So but it needs to be tested in the real world, but we know it works in some areas. We need to test it to be able to make sure that it works in others. Thank you.